Hello and welcome to the Westcity Church podcast. If you'd like to get to know us more, find us at westcitychurch.com.au. We really hope that you're encouraged by today's message.
Something we do every week at Westcity, we have someone come from our community and talk about the table. And we come to the table of Jesus at the end here at Westcity. We see it as the pinnacle of our service where we are invited, everyone is invited by Jesus to come and receive from him. And so Josh Potter is going to come and speak to us this morning. So thanks, Josh.
Thank you. Morning, Westcity. Thanks for clarifying that it's Josh Potter, because I think there's about 4 or 5 of us in the room. I get to share this morning. Like Phil already said, we take it at the end. It's something that we do weekly, and it's a big part of who we are as a community. I just want to read a passage quickly before I share from 2 Corinthians, just skipping past the little Paul's little common intro. Praise be to the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all of our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. For just as we share abundantly in the sufferings of the Messiah, so also our comfort abounds through the Messiah. If we are distressed, it is for your comfort and salvation. If we are comforted, it is for your comfort, which produces in you patient endurance of the same sufferings we suffer. And our hope for you is firm, because we know that just as you share in our sufferings, so also you share in our comfort. We do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the troubles we experienced in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt we had received the sentence of death. But this happened so that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. He has delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us again. On him we have set our hope that he will continue to deliver us. As you help us by your prayers, then many will give thanks on our behalf for the gracious favor granted us in answer to the prayers of many. I was told in the email not to get too teachy, so I won't go too much, but it's really just a provocative sort of thought which I get out of this short little intro to Paul's letter, which obviously falls in the middle of a long line of communication that he's had with the church in Corinth. But there's just a perpetual sort of motion to Paul's mindset, and the idea that like Paul, who once was Saul, who actually persecuted the church, the Jesus followers in the earliest times, actually became the one who suffered under that same persecution that he sort of instigated and created. But he has this mindset even amongst that moment and being in that sort of field. And he obviously his mission as Paul is to go out to the Gentiles and sort of create a unified family between Jew and Gentile under the lordship of Jesus. And through all that suffering, immense persecution, I mean, we read the words there himself that it was as if they couldn't even bear it anymore, like they had received the sentence of death. And yet his mindset and the way that he was still going about things and building these communities, where they would come to the table and break bread and receive the cup. His mindset is that he's enduring that for them, that is actually, it's for their comfort. And in fact, when he's in those moments of intense persecution, what he's actually receiving from God is something that he then perceives as a blessing to pass on to others. That sort of perpetual mindset and that sort of cultivation of what it would create in a community of Jesus followers, that is something that I see as the beautiful picture of the church. It's something that is encapsulated, I think, in the receiving of the bread and the cup. When I look around the room, especially here in Westcity, there's people from all walks of life, different ages, communities, backgrounds. There's people that have suffered all sorts of different instances, circumstances. We could list, I'm sure, a long list of a bunch of negative things. As we heard last week, and we hear sort of every year, I mean, it's one of the Beatitudes, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. And I think Paul had that mindset of even through this intense mourning that he was going through, he knew and he had hope that I will receive comfort, and then was able to actually pass that comfort on to others. So I think for me, my personal thought when I come to the table is, it is that initial individual invitation. It is actually for you in particular. Like, comfort is coming your way for you. But then as you take it, you sort of realize at the same time you've just entered like a family of a whole bunch of different people that are receiving a whole bunch of different comfort and wisdom. And it's in the sharing of that community and that embrace that we actually see the beauty of what Jesus can do in a community. And I think we've seen that even this morning, just even having a prayer for someone that's entering in chaplaincy. We have people that are in the forefronts of mental health fields and healthcare professionals, and people working in fields of poverty and all sorts. And that's the community that I think Jesus wanted to build, and I think he'd be proud of what we do here at the table. And I think as we come for yourself. If you need to receive comfort, if it's for you that you need to receive, then come and take and receive. And if you're sitting here and you feel like your cup is already overflowing, then even better, because it means that you can be a light and a salt in this community and the community that you enter on Monday. So that's it for me.
Hi everyone, my name's Theo and I'm talking this morning on the Beatitudes. We're in this middle of the series called The Sermon. John's going to be providing backup music for me.
Josh.
How's everyone doing today? It's good. I am excited to be talking this morning. When I found out I was going to be talking about the Sermon on the Mount and talking about the Beatitudes, I was pretty excited. And then when they sent me the verse that I'm going to be speaking on this morning, my heart kind of sank. The verse goes a bit like this. It says, "Joyful are those whose wills are surrendered to God, for they will inherit the earth." And when I first saw that, we sort of trust that the Spirit is picking the right people to talk about the right things. And when I saw this, I felt really targeted by the Holy Spirit, because I feel like this isn't me. Like, this is something I struggle with. I don't surrender myself to God like on a daily basis. And since the start of the year, I've been thinking about this a lot. But I thought if I'm going to speak to you guys about it, I need to get my act together. And so I reluctantly went to my Bible and I opened the Bible up and I was like, this is sort of a modern translation. I think if I go back to the source and see what it is, and it's this, it's "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." And I thought, well, that's easy. I'm meek as. I can be humble. I've got self-loathing down. I've got no particular achievements to boast about. I can be humble all day. And the juxtaposition to those two verses is kind of shocking, because if these two things are supposed to be saying the same thing, then I feel like I'm missing something in the text. I feel like I'm not quite getting it. And so I've got the option here of either taking the easy way out, and then I can come here and I can do like a nice little quaint sermon about why God thinks being meek is great and how you guys can get more meek in your day-to-day life. Or I can try and take it deeper and I can look at what the text says and try and be willing to surrender and see what God is going to try and do through me this morning. So, today we're going to look at 5 ways to be more meek. I'm actually not going to talk about that this morning. I'm actually not going to talk much about surrendering my will to God either, because when I started to look into the text and I started to see what I thought that this was actually saying, I thought that there's something else in here that seems really obvious. And the question that I began to ask myself is, why was it that I came to this first verse and I feel like my first reaction was actually really off the mark? I feel like I missed what Jesus is saying here. And when I looked at the second verse again, I thought, wow, this is really off the mark. I feel like I'm missing exactly what Jesus is saying here. And so why, when Jesus is being so clear about who God is and what God values, why is it that I'm missing the point? But before I get ahead of myself, I'll just jump in and get a little bit of context here. So context of this is Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus this is sort of the start of his ministry. He comes out of the wilderness and he's moving through the countryside and he's preaching the good news about the kingdom, and he's healing all sorts of people who come to him, and crowds start to gather around him, and he goes up into a mountainside and he begins to preach, and he starts that off with these Beatitudes, which is a fancy word. It's Greek. It just means blessings, so I'll probably just call them the blessings. And we've been talking about them for a bunch of weeks, so I won't go through them all, but because then there'd be spoilers for the next couple of weeks. We don't want to do that. But he starts proclaiming this stuff, and this is the first big chunk of teaching in Matthew that Jesus does, and the implication in the text is that this is not just a sermon that Jesus did one time to a bunch of people on top of a mountain. This is kind of like Jesus' greatest hits. This is what he keeps coming back to. And when you're looking in the Gospels and it says that Jesus is proclaiming the good news about the kingdom, you should imagine that this is kind of what he's getting down to. This is the message. And so he's on a mountaintop and he's saying, blessed are the poor in spirit. But when he's on a boat, preaching to people on the shore at Galilee, he's also saying, blessed are the poor. And when he's, on the mountaintop saying, blessed are those who mourn, he's also in the synagogues saying, those who mourn are going to be comforted. And he's telling people on the streets that they'll be blessed. And he's telling people in their homes that they'll be blessed as well. Because those crowds that gathered around them, he looked at them and he said, blessed are. And the other thing that's important to note is this is not something that Jesus invented. He didn't come up with this sort of format of blessed are the such and such, for they such and such and such. This is a common sort of teaching proclamation practice. It happens a bunch of times in the Bible, a bunch of times in the Old Testament. James does it, Paul does it, I think Peter does it too. And other people outside of the Bible did it as well. And it's a way that groups would or rabbis would come together and say, this is who is in the in crowd, and this is who is in the out crowd, and this is what God values. And so the shocking thing here is the people are hearing it, and Jesus is talking to them, and they're people who've been healed, and they're people who are just from the country, and they're bumpkins, and they don't know much about God, but they see something that's going on. And Jesus looks at them, and he says, blessed are the poor. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are the meek. And I kind of wanted that to be the kicker. I kind of wanted that to be the big reveal, is that Jesus is giving this revolutionary message that the people that he says God is invested in, the people who he says are welcome in the kingdom of God, that's not the people that society thought. But that's sort of not that surprising. It's not that controversial because it's literally written there on the page. But what is weird to me is that when I first came to this verse, when I first got to talk about this, I made it about me. And the first thing I thought was, is my will surrendered to God? And then the second thing was, this asinine, this banal idea I have of what it means to be humble or to meek. I was like, I can do that. Therefore, I can enter into this blessing. And I feel like I'm really missing the point here, which is that Jesus is talking to people and telling them, people told you that the kingdom of God wasn't about you, but it is. That the blessings of the kingdom extend even to you. And so what I actually wanted to talk about this morning was about the way that we kind of, in church, get up and we moralize lessons that aren't about us and try and use that as a way to get the blessing for ourselves. And I think that ranges all the way from the good intentioned through to the utterly destructive. And I want to unpack what that looks like today. Because I, went to research this and I looked at a whole bunch of different sermons and a whole bunch of different lessons on the internet. I went through all the books in my house that spoke about the Sermon on the Mount. I looked at the commentaries in the Bible, and ubiquitously there was this common theme that people sort of go, these are the things that God values. Poor in spirit, mourning, meek, peacemakers, that sort of stuff. And this is how you become that so you can receive the blessing. And it becomes this quid pro quo kind of thing where we think that if this is what God values, we need to try and become the thing that God values so that we can then be a part of the blessing. And it's entirely missing the point if the point was that Jesus is saying to people preemptively, you are blessed. And so the first way that I saw this happening in a big way was that people, they modify what the word meek means. And you sort of have to do this because if you're making a moral lesson that sort of says, hey, Jesus wants you to be like this so that you can be blessed, you can kind of skirt around that with poor in spirit, you can kind of skirt around that with mourning, but when you get to meek, then it becomes really difficult because meek is a weird word. Okay, meek is, what does meek even mean? It's like people don't even use that anymore. I wanted to put up some like cool pop cultural references for the word meek, and all the ones I could find were in the 80s. Have people heard the Frank Zappa song? Yeah, the meek shall inherit nothing. Yeah, it's good. So pastors sort of go, okay, well, if we're going to receive blessings and we want people to meek, Jesus can't be saying that people are supposed to be weak or timid or shy. So we have to work out what meek means. And I think that the key thing here is that meek clearly doesn't mean meek, They look at the Greek or they look at the Latin and they dig through. Now, I really like a sermon that goes, here's a passage that's hard to understand, and we're going to unpack that by looking at what the actual word and the context means, and then we'll understand what it means together. It'll give us new clarity about who God is. But I saw some real exegetical acrobatics this week, people bending over backwards to try and make this word mean something I do not think that it means. And the most common thing that people would sort of try and say it means something like power under control. And the idea is that it would be like, you might use this word to talk about, in the Greek, you might use this word to talk about a wild stallion that's been tamed, an animal that's gotten used to being beat into submission. And so we'd sort of say, to be meek, to be subject to this blessing, the idea is that you need to take your power that you hold and your status and just don't make a big deal about that. Sort of like, just don't be all like out and about it, sort of humble yourself a little bit. And I think that's a really attractive message to people who have power and who have status, because it says that you can hold on to your power and status and still be subject to this blessing that's coming out in the Beatitudes. And the most egregious version I saw of this is one particular commentator who goes around at the moment saying that they looked into the text because meek didn't seem right to them, and the Latin, and they found that it actually meant, like it was a word that meant sheathed. It described people who had weapons, knew how to use them, but kept them sheathed. And the idea was, I guess, that God would bless you if you are armed and dangerous, if you're an intimidating force that doesn't act out. And I think that's sick, man. Because if the message here is supposed to be that the people who are meek, if they have nothing, then there's blessings for them. And so powerful people who are saying, oh no, we're going to keep hold of our power, keep hold of our status, we're going to cling to violence like we used to. And then we'll be able to take this blessing as well. We're going to leave the meek with nothing. And I think it's a bit disingenuous to look at the Greek, which can be a bit ambiguous, or look at the Latin, which can be a bit ambiguous, or look at the Aramaic that Jesus probably spoke this into before it was translated into either of those languages. It's a bit disingenuous to look that deep into it to try and work out what they're saying, because Jesus is quoting the Old Testament here. And it's not that ambiguous in the Old Testament. This is Psalm 37. It says, the meek will inherit the land. And the Hebrew word here for meek is not ambiguous. It's used stacks of times in the Old Testament. It means poor. It means afflicted. It means helpless. It means oppressed. When Jesus in Luke sits down to start his ministry, he goes and opens up the scroll of Isaiah 61. He says, the Spirit of the Lord has upon me to proclaim good news to the poor. That's the same word, the meek. Same word. So if you cling into power and you cling into your status, this isn't for you. The meek can't even have this. We take it away from them. The second way that I see people sort of manipulating this term, and just to mention, because I'm not going to be able to get into it, but inheriting the land, like the other thing is when we modify these promises, I think we often, like we make in moral lessons, we forget what the actual blessings are. And inheriting the land is something that means something to Israelites. It means something to the people that David's talking to in this psalm. It means something to the people Jesus is talking to who are living under occupational rule. But when we make it moral lessons about us, we kind of like skip over that and just say, there's blessings. There's blessings. But I don't really have time to get into what that means more deeply, I'm afraid. The second way that we sort of modify this verse is to go the other direction. We get away from the violence and the powerful, and we make it about this ideal of humbleness, humility, I should say, lowliness, meekness, timidness, and this sort of Platonic ideal of what a Christian is that they are surrendered, unassuming. And they use the powerful example of Christ to go through life and sort of affect the world around them. And a way that I commonly, and I guess that's probably what comes back to that first verse sort of translation, getting at this idea of surrendering to God. And there's nothing wrong with that. To be surrendered to God is a really good idea. And to be humble is a really good idea. And the Sermon on the Mount definitely talks about those things. But the Beatitudes, I don't think kind of do. And the story that came up that I illustrated this that people talk about is a story about Mother Teresa. And so Mother Teresa's in Calcutta and she's living in a house with a group of orphans and they don't have enough food to eat. And so she goes out begging for food and she finds a baker and she goes and asks the baker for bread. And the baker's so incensed that she would come and beg for bread from him, spits in her hand. And so Mother Teresa, as the story goes, she closes her hand around the spit and she says, "Thank you for what you have given to me." And putting her other hand forward, she says, "And now what will you give to the orphans?" And the baker is so shocked by her humility that the story goes that he gives her bread and continues to donate to her cause in an ongoing sense. And I think it's a really beautiful story. I think it's true. I think it's a true story. I think it's a really beautiful story because it shows as an example of Jesus' sacrificial leadership and sacrificial love. And there's stuff in the Sermon on the Mount about turning the other cheek and not resisting evil people with violence. It's the sort of thing we should definitely do. But if we use it as an example to sort of talk about why blessed are the meek, I think we're missing the point. Because the story goes that you guys should kind of go out and be like Mother Teresa. And it forgets that the meek are in this story as well. There's orphans in this story, the oppressed, the afflicted, and they fade into the background because we highlight the person who is doing what God is doing. And if the verse says that God is extending the blessings of the kingdom even to those who are oppressed and afflicted, then we're missing the point. Because Mother Teresa didn't set out to go and be poor so she could be blessed. She didn't set out to go and mourn so she could be blessed. It was like Josh was saying about Paul this morning. He wasn't going out to try and be a mourner. But when he saw what was important to his Father in heaven, when Mother Teresa saw what was important to her Father in heaven, she said, "I want to be a blessing to those people too." Mother Teresa is God in this story, someone who is showing that they value the poor and the oppressed and the afflicted, showing that they are important, that they are worthy of being blessed as well. And the third and final way I sort of saw this sort of getting manipulated was to take that even a step further, take this sort of idea of surrendering and bump it up to 11 and turn this into a message about submission and obedience. And so the idea then would be church leaders would get up and say, so that you can be in the in crowd, so that you can be subject to this blessing, you need to submit. And the church obviously has a pretty bad record with this kind of stuff because the language of submission and obedience very quickly becomes the language of abuse. And so you can see why it would be attractive to a leader to say, you know what would be really great? Compliant people in my congregation, people who don't raise a stink, people who don't question God when they don't receive healing or wonder why we're spending money on this and not on serving the poor, people who don't ask questions, people who will submit to their husbands, submit to their parents, submit to this teaching, submit to me. And it's so awful that a line that Jesus says that is, those people who are oppressed, God is interested in blessing them, is transformed into, if you want this blessing, you better oppress yourself. But the truth is, if we take this verse seriously, then God is already counting people who are oppressed as blessed. And the truth is, if there are people who are non-compliant in our communities, if there are people who are difficult, who raise a fuss, who ask questions, then God wants to bless them too. So it doesn't matter if they don't look like us, or act like us, or think like us, or even like us. Because God's invitation is for them. So I actually think that meek just means meek. And in conclusion, to wrap things up, people who are paying attention will notice that I very cleverly managed to not talk about myself submitting to God or surrendering to God. But that's because when I came to these passages, I sort of thought that what was important to talk about was how I made this about me. And how I think in the church we can make this about me when this passage is about somebody that God thinks is valuable. And so here's the good news. The good news is if you are oppressed, if you are poor, if you are afflicted, then God's blessing is for you. The blessings of the kingdom are for you. And the good news is this: if you're not afflicted and you're not poor and you're not oppressed, you don't have to become that way to be in with the in crowd. But if you want to be like the Apostle Paul, if you want to be like Mother Teresa, if you want to be like your Father in heaven, then value the things that he values. Look at the people he wants to bless, the people he says he is blessing, and go out and be a blessing to them as well.
How good was that message? Thank you so much for joining us. Each week at West City, we say a benediction together. We do this because we believe that the purpose of the church is to be a caring community for the world, and that as we go and serve others, we enter into Christ's work of welcome, restoration and healing, both for us and others. We believe that in doing so, we get to see and encounter Christ. So let's say the benediction together. We come together as the church to be reminded of the go of Christ. So we will go out and feed the hungry, go out and clothe the naked, go out and fight for justice, go out and end oppression, go out and proclaim anew the old story, go out and associate with those who don't look like us, think like us, act like us, and don't even like us. And we'll do it all in the name of the one who sent us. His name is Jesus.